As I've said many times that, obviously in this trade puzzle, China is the biggest piece.
The Wall Street Journal is reporting that China has stopped publishing hundreds of statistics.
Getting better terms of trade is not always a straight line. It's not always a pleasant process.
The Chinese regime does not want us to know what's going on.
China does need us more than we need them. But the fact is, we all kind of need each other.
Yes, this certainly is. And it's been going on now for a couple of years. And they're going to continue to restrict information to us.
But I think at the end, the trading relationships will be stronger.
That's not fair. That needs to end, and that's why this whole thing is happening.
I got a lot of big news. One of the biggest news we have is from Wall Street Journal, and they're reporting that China has stopped reporting a lot of data. Now, one thing we've been covering on this channel for a long time is China doesn't report their youth unemployment since 2023, if I'm being correct. Last time they reported their youth unemployment, it was at 23% or 21%. And since then, it's likely have gone up. We don't know the data because CCP doesn't report. Then, of course, we also have to remember that any data CCP does report is usually massaged to make CCP look good. And that's exactly why they stopped publishing the youth unemployment, because 21% is pretty bad for a communist party, I would say. All right, we got people from Louisiana. Oh, I'm cutting out? Is that true? Is that the problem for everyone, or is the voice good? We got people from Houston, Los Angeles. Perfect, let's go. We got a lot of people. And by the way, if you guys are not subscribed, be sure to hit the subscribe button. We got a live counter right there. Maybe we can hit 50,000 today. We are at 47,000, so we'll get that going. But, oh yeah, the first news is China pausing a lot of data that they're just not publishing, that they used to publish. This includes land sale, foreign investment, which has been dropping like crazy since the tariffs have gone in effect. And the main reason being is people want to get their money out of China if they cannot, profit from China, basically. If they cannot produce stuff in China, they would rather just leave. But CCP is making it really hard for people to leave China. So everyone who has invested in factories, everyone who has invested in land or anything like that in China, well, CCP is not like US, or China is not like US, where you can just sell your US dollars and convert to any currency. In fact, there's a limit. I think even for billionaires in China, the limit is like $8,000 they can convert every single day. So that means if you're a very rich person, you're having a very hard time getting your money out of China. And that's for the simple reason CCP does not want the Chinese currency crashing or going up like crazy, because they want to maintain like a steady level of the currency, because that helps their export sector. So Chinese currency is not at market rate at all. The Chinese federal government is managing it. But let's listen to this segment by Gordon Chang, who talks about why China is pausing publishing all this.
The Wall Street Journal is reporting that China has stopped.
Oh, is the sound actually messing up? Let me check. Wow, I actually have no clue. I'll get someone who knows. I know I look Indian, but I'm not very good at tech. So I'll get someone to look at the sound after today. Outside of that, like on my side, it's showing everything great. Oh, wow, we got 1,200 people live. By the way, if there's anyone who isn't subscribed, be sure to hit the subscribe button. You can see that live counter right above my head. And we just want that counter to keep going up. Yeah, we got 600 people watching and only 72 likes. Exactly, Deborah. Let me pin this message. If you haven't liked the stream, be sure to hit the like button. It just gets more people watching. But the first news we are covering, if you're just joining in, is the Chinese economy is showing signs of cracking. And again, we won't have the accurate data from CCP. That's something we already know. But everyone outside who follows China, they usually adjust their analysis based on the number they publish, right? The way we do it is like CCP publishes a GDP growth figure every year. We all know it's not accurate. In fact, even the CCP premier has publicly said to the US president that it's not accurate. CCP knows it's not accurate. So even CCP adjusts that data whenever they report it, so they know the correct data. So what foreign people have started doing is they look at the light pollution from China using satellite. If the light pollution goes up, maybe you can assume the GDP is growing. If it goes down, you can assume the GDP is going down. Again, it's not accurate. It's not going to give us the exact data of how much the GDP is going up or how much it's going down. But it gives us a rough sense, like it is directionally correct. If the light pollution is going up, it will give us a sense that GDP is going up. If it's going down, GDP is going down. Well, China has stopped reporting a lot of the figures that were used by foreign companies and foreign countries to get a sense of the Chinese economy. So let's watch this clip from Gordon Chang about that.
The Wall Street Journal is reporting that China has stopped publishing hundreds of statistics, even official soy sauce production reports, making it harder to know what's actually going on with the economy there. Joining me now, Gatestone Institute senior fellow and author of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America, Gordon Chang. Gordon, good morning. And what is your reaction to this stop in data production by the CCP? I mean, not that we...
By the way, hopefully we have Gordon Chang someday on the stream here, because we want to try to do this daily. So if you guys enjoy it, just let us know in the chat. We'll try to do this daily. But hopefully Gordon Chang sees this and someday he comes on.
Could necessarily believe the data that we've been given for years. Fair enough. I've said that multiple times. But this seems to be a new level.
Yes, this certainly is. And it's been going on now for a couple of years because the Chinese technocrats understand that we use underlying data to draw questions about their headline gross domestic product numbers. So, for instance, we're seeing a lot of evidence that suggests that their 5.4% report of growth in Q1 can't be true. And now...
Oh, by the way, yeah, talking about this, two things I want to point out. They published the Q1 growth, and that was before Trump put all the tariffs on China, right? And they said their economy grew 5.4, and they were aiming to grow at 5.1. So China beat the expectations. But they just make up numbers. So everyone looks at like the supporting numbers, right? So they looked at like, okay, is the Chinese tax revenue growing? Well, that's not growing, that's going down. So that doesn't really support the GDP going up. The second thing is a lot of Chinese media, they love looking at US electricity consumption. And whenever US publishes the GDP data here in the United States, they say, hey, US is not consuming more electricity, so they're lying about the GDP, right? When in reality, the US economy is not built like Chinese economy. It's not as factory heavy. So using electric consumption to just the GDP is probably not the best way to do it. But again, that's what they use, right? Well, this year, they're not talking about the electric consumption in China because if we look at electric consumption in China, it's going down, all the while CCP is saying that the GDP is going up. So even by their own logic, the Chinese media knows that the CCP is lying, but of course they cannot report it because the media there is controlled by the CCP. So they say what CCP wants them to say. But let's continue. For everyone who's saying the audio keeps cutting out, a lot of people said in the chat that if you just refresh it, it will be fixed. Hopefully it's not unwatchable, but again, I'll study the stream right after I end it, and then I'll make sure it's fixed for tomorrow. So I don't know too much about tech, so I'll have someone else help me out after today.
As President Trump said, the Chinese economy is contracting. We saw that from the price data for March and February. We also saw it in the PMI, the Purchasing Managers Index for April, which clearly showed factory activity on the downswing. So yes, the Chinese regime does not want us to know what's going on, and they're going to continue to restrict information to us.
But at the same time, they're trying to solidify relationships around.
See, this is also why a lot of people say, oh, China wants to replace the dollar. That will just never happen. Because we have to think about how a lot of the data collection and data reporting works in the US, right? In the US, we have departments that are independent of the government, and they measure GDP data. They measure a bunch of stuff. Like Fed measures the inflation, and they're independent, which again, I think Trump may not be happy about it, but it's a very good thing for US markets because they don't play politics. They don't get involved. They do their stuff independently and they just measure it. In China, it's not independent. It's like China can stop publishing any data whenever they want. That's not a good news for markets and investors. So one of the big reasons why dollar is the reserve currency is because the Fed is independent. A lot of the agencies are independent over here that manage the economy and measure the economy statistics. In China, it's not like that. So people just don't trust their currency. So there is no world that the Chinese currency is going to replace the US dollar as the reserve currency. If anything, there's a very low chance, but if US does lose its reserve status, it's going to be like a basket of currencies that people will start using, or maybe gold, but no one's going to the Chinese currency or even the Russian currency. And there's never going to be a BRICS currency because India has publicly said multiple times they don't want a BRICS currency because India doesn't trust China. China wouldn't want someone else controlling the currency because if it's not dollar, why would China have someone else control it? But anyways, let's continue with this.
Around the world at the exclusion of the United States. I mean, you know, look at Russia and China, Iran and China, their moves in Africa, especially in Western Africa, Gordon. So the Chinese seem to be taking another tack. That, you know, they may be closed off to the American market, but they're trying to strengthen their relationships. I mean, even Chevron CEO Mike Wirth, who joined Maria on SMF yesterday, he warned that China could hold more influence on Venezuela if the Trump administration terminates a Biden-era grant that would allow Chevron to export Venezuelan oil to the U.S. Watch what he told her. I want to get your response to this.
A good portion of Venezuelan oil has historically come to the United States. Refineries on the Gulf Coast are designed to run that specific type of oil, and so it's very important for energy security in the U.S. The changes in the rules mean that that oil won't flow to the U.S. now, so making us less secure. China is actually the largest buyer of Venezuelan oil today. Venezuelan government officials have been in China very recently, encouraging China to buy more. And so as the largest buyer today, the policies could drive even more of that trade to China.
And this is sort of China's MO, become a country's biggest creditor and ultimately dominate. And I don't think the U.S. or the Trump administration.
Well, this is also, China is, I think, one of the biggest importer of Venezuelan oil, after the United States. I don't know the exact figure, but we're going to pause using the Venezuelan oil. But Trump has slapped on a 25% tariff on any country that buys Venezuelan oil. Now, I don't know when he'll enforce this, but China is continually buying Venezuelan oil. So if we want to enforce that, that's another 25% on top of a 145 we already got. And on top of that, just 3 days ago, I think Trump announced a 100% tariff on anyone who buys Iranian oil. And 90% of Iranian oil goes to China. So that's going to be insane if he does decide to enforce that. Again, we don't know when he will.
Wants to see China dominating another country.
Well, you're right. We've seen.
Oh, wow. We got 3,000 people, so that's definitely insane. If you haven't hit the like button, be sure to hit the like button. It just lets us know if you're enjoying the stream or not. Secondly, if you're having audio issues, just refresh your stream, because at the beginning, we had some issues, but it should be better now. And there's a subscribe counter right above my head, so hit the subscribe button and then you'll see.
This playbook before in Africa, in Latin America, and Central Asia. And China has created a stronger presence, stronger influence, and control over economies and governments around the world through using their economic assets and position to do so.
Gordon, your reaction to that?
Well, everything that Mike Wirth says is true, but there's another aspect to that, and that is if Chevron leaves, as President Trump has ordered, then the Chinese and Russians will come in, but they'll come in on terms which are not as favorable as the terms that Venezuela had with Chevron. And that means the Venezuelan regime will be weakened. And that's an important thing. Let's remember that the Venezuelan opposition, the people who want democracy in that country, want Chevron out. And they understand the reason why, because Maduro will have less of a good time with this. Also, we've got to remember the context for this. You know, all of that migration during the Biden era through our southern border, that wasn't organic. That was actually supported by the Venezuelan regime, which supported NGOs, which told us what they were doing. They were attacking our sovereignty. So Venezuela is an enemy, and we need to make sure that we don't strengthen our enemies. We can get oil from other places. We can drill out our own soil. We can buy from our friends. Let's not buy from our enemies.
Well, and I think that's the president.
Well, we actually do have a question from Mike Stewart, who donated $14, so thank you so much for that. Unsure of what CCP really is and what its influence in your country means? Invest an hour of your time to watch Frank Dictor lecture. Well, I don't know who that is, but we'll definitely watch it. If it's interesting, we'll make a video. Your children and grandchildren's freedom will thank you. Now, yes, CCP is definitely, one of the craziest thing is if you look back, what happened, like the world depending on CCP supply chain, China's supply chain, is not by accident. It's not because the Chinese manufacturing is so great. Of course, it is really good because they have had 20 years of practice, you know? But in 2021, you can hear Xi Jinping publicly tell the Chinese people that they want the world more dependent on China's supply chain because it gives them leverage. We saw what happened in 2020, 2019 when the COVID stuff started. China started what is the word for it? They just started hoarding up supplies, the medical supplies and all that, when they found out about the virus, all the while they didn't tell the world what was what was waiting for them, like what was coming. And another crazy fact is when China discovered the virus in Wuhan, they paused all the domestic flights. So any flight between Wuhan and a Chinese city was paused, but the foreign flights were still allowed. So that means using those foreign flights, that's how the virus spreads so quickly to other countries.
President Trump's point, and it has been for years, drill, baby, drill. You know, we've got the capacity to generate energy here in the United States on our land. Let's do it. I've got Liz Peek on set. She's got a question for you.
Gordon, good morning. There was apparently news coverage in China a week ago or so about factories closing in the South, people being laid off, which I was surprised about because there is such a hold on information flow, and I don't think that's what Xi Jinping wants Chinese people to be watching. What's your take on that? Is he beginning to get pushback for his one-man controlled economy, which is doing so poorly now?
Yes, well, he is. Well, first of all, there are factory closures. China can't sell to the global South or to anybody else the products that it would otherwise have.
Well, America doesn't have wrong oil. It's just our refineries don't refine the oils that we produce here in America. And that's because a lot of the refineries are old, back in the day when we got the oil from the Middle East. So they are built to refine the oil that's like a lot more thicker. It has a different viscosity, and that's what American refineries do. And our oil just goes to foreign refineries who have the capability to just refine their oil. So it's a pretty even trade. But let's say the good part is we now produce more oil than we use every single day, like on a daily basis. So if there is a problem where we cannot get foreign oil into our country, we could have our refineries just, it will take a lot of investment, but we can refine our own oil. Right now, if you have the opportunity to just send it somewhere else and buy the oil that's cheaper to refine here, that's what's happening. But you know, the country that's the biggest importer of oil in the country, in the world, is China, and they don't produce nearly as much as they need. And that's why I think almost 80% of Chinese oil comes from the Middle East, which goes to the Malacca Strait and all that. And that's a very important choke point that can become very important if China ever attacks Taiwan.
Sold to the U.S. because Trump's tariffs at their current rates keep many Chinese products out of our country. And that means these export-oriented factories, especially those in the southern portion of the country, they have been closing. They've been in trouble for a couple of years now, and they certainly are at a point where they can't continue. This is some.
How do we know? So the reason China is losing the trade war, the reason you can infer it, is because they just stopped publishing data that tells us anything about their economy. And it just happened today. They just announced that, hey, we're not going to be publishing any data. And on top of that, you know, when President Trump put 125% tariff on Chinese goods, China retaliated with their own 125%. But this is where we have to look at the numbers, right? US imports roughly $460 billion worth of goods from China. So let's just round it up, 500 billion, while we export roughly 150 billion to China. So our tariffs are a lot more, like hitting Chinese economy a lot more harder than their tariffs are hitting our economy. But on top of that, China slowly took off the tariffs without making any announcement to the Chinese people or to the foreign media on roughly one-third of the product that we export to China. So roughly $40 billion worth of the product, China is not charging tariffs. And the reason is simple. China needs those products. A lot of those products are airline related. So China needs the maintenance products, like the products to keep up their airplanes so they can keep flying. Otherwise, they will just start falling out of the sky like it's happening in Russia. And semiconductor that China is very dependent on, of course, China needs it. And I think another thing they took off the tariff from is ethanol. And that's something that they need to produce plastic. Since China is the manufacturing factory of the world, they need to produce a lot of plastic, I'm guessing, and that's why they took off the tariff. But what's interesting here is they didn't make any announcement because they didn't want the Chinese citizens thinking that the CCP is bending the knee. CCP is, you know, giving into the U.S. demands because they want to seem like the strong man. And they're pushing this narrative in China where U.S. is the enemy, U.S. is the one who started this trade war, when in reality, China has been working towards this unfair trade practice for years. In 2018, we had a trade deal with China, but they never fulfilled it. So how could they blame U.S. for killing the world trade when China agrees to a trade deal but doesn't fulfill its terms?
Something that is weakening Xi Jinping's hold on power. Remember, he's got near total accountability because he's taken power from everybody else.
By the way, this is my one of the first streams, so I don't know how to manage the chat and do this. So that's why I'm not as active with interacting with the chat.
And that means he's being blamed for the tariff war, as the Chinese call it. And that means his grip, I think, is now weakening. He's not the all-powerful leader that he was pre-COVID.
Along with those nagging questions, Gordon, about his health, which has been brought up repeatedly. And again, because this is China, can't get a clear answer on that as well.
Well, also, he recently removed the second in command at PLA. So definitely things are not as safe for Xi Jinping as they once were in China.